If you close your eyes and listen carefully, you might hear it, a faint hum beneath the modern world's noise, a rhythm older than history itself. The pulse of drums carved from hollowed trees, the whisper of reeds swaying in river winds, the chime of bronze bells echoing across temples and markets. It is the sound of ancient music, humanity's first attempt to give shape to emotion, to speak without words, to make the invisible visible. But what did it really sound like? Not the romanticized melodies of modern films or the reconstructed pieces we hear in museums, but the living, breathing songs of our ancestors, the sounds that guided rituals, soothed newborns, called to gods, and mourned the dead. For most of human history, music wasn't written down. It was felt, shared, and passed through memory, a fragile thread that tied generations together. Every note carried meaning. For the Egyptians, it was divine communication. For the Greeks, the very language of the cosmos. For the Mesopotamians, a bridge between the human and the eternal. Today, when archaeologists uncover fragments of flutes, harps, and drums buried in the dust of time, they are not merely finding artifacts. They are finding echoes of the human soul. Each fragment tells us that people, thousands of years ago, longed for beauty in the same way we do. They looked at the world, and instead of remaining silent, they chose to sing. Music was not entertainment. It was existence itself. And as we travel back through history, across ancient kingdoms and empires, we begin to rediscover that forgotten symphony, the one that once filled the earth with a harmony so pure that it could reach even the gods. Section 1. The first notes, the sound of the stone and the wind. Long before the first civilizations built cities, there were sounds, not of instruments, but of nature. The crack of thunder, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of rivers, and the distant cry of animals formed the earliest orchestra. Ancient humans listened, imitated, and eventually began to join in. The first musicians were not composers, but imitators of the world around them. Archaeological evidence suggests that the oldest known musical instrument is over 40,000 years old. A simple flute made from the wing bone of a vulture, found in the caves of southern Germany. Its holes were carefully spaced, suggesting that whoever crafted it already understood pitch and tone. Imagine that moment, the first human placing their lips against a hollow bone and creating a sound not for survival, but for expression. It must have felt like magic. From there, music evolved in tandem with humanity itself. In Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates carved fertile lands, early instruments took form: clay rattles, frame drums, and lyres strung with animal gut. These were not merely tools for amusement. They carried spiritual significance. A beat could awaken a god's attention. A melody could ensure a good harvest. Each instrument had a voice, and each voice had power. In ancient Egypt, music was said to have been created by the gods themselves. The goddess Hathor, often depicted holding a sistrum, a rattle-like instrument, was believed to fill the air with joy and light through sound. Musicians in temples would shake these bronze instruments in rhythmic motion to honor her, their chimes shimmering through sacred halls scented with incense. But outside temples, the sounds of Egypt were more varied. Harps and flutes filled banquet halls, where guests reclined on cushions while listening to songs of love and wine. Tomb paintings show blind harpists, their fingers gently plucking at strings, surrounded by dancers and jugglers. The music of the Nile was sensual, flowing, and rhythmic, a reminder that even amid the strict order of Egyptian life, there was room for passion. Meanwhile, across the Aegean Sea, The early Greeks were beginning to see music as more than divine. It was mathematical, cosmic, and human all at once. Pythagoras, the philosopher and mathematician, believed that music reflected the harmony of the universe. By studying the vibration of strings, he discovered ratios that still form the basis of modern scales. To him, the universe itself was a kind of lyre, and the stars were its strings. The Greek aulos, a double-reeded flute, produced a sharp, penetrating sound, often used in festivals, theater, and even warfare. Its tone was wild and emotional, capable of stirring ecstasy or sorrow. In contrast, the kithara, the ancestor of our modern guitar, symbolized reason and balance. Together, they represented the eternal Greek duality, passion and logic, Dionysus and Apollo. In China, ancient philosophers believed that the right kind of music could bring harmony to the state and even align the cosmos. The guiqin, a seven-string zither, was played not for entertainment but for meditation. Its sound described as like wind over pine trees. Court musicians tuned their instruments not to please the ear, but to match the vibrational order of the universe. A dissonant note wasn't merely unpleasant, it was considered a moral failure. Far across the world, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, Africa, and Oceania also developed their own soundscapes, each shaped by the land itself. The rhythm of drums mimicked the heartbeat. The call of wooden flutes echoed birdsong. In these cultures, sound was inseparable from nature, and silence was never truly empty. It was simply the space between notes. It's easy to imagine that ancient music might have been simple, but that's far from true. Recent studies using replicas of ancient instruments reveal surprising complexity, layered harmonies, subtle tonal shifts, and scales that don't exist in modern Western music. Ancient musicians knew how to manipulate sound, not just to please the ear, but to alter the mind. Some ancient shrines, like the Hypogeum of H.L. Saflieni in Malta, a Neolithic underground temple, were built with perfect acoustic properties. When a low male voice chants within it, the entire chamber vibrates, producing resonances that can alter brain waves. It suggests that early humans understood how sound could induce trance-like states, an ancient form of spiritual technology. Music, then, wasn't just heard, it was felt. It shaped rituals, emotions, and consciousness. It connected people to nature, to each other, and to forces they could not name. Long before language was born, humanity already had a universal one. The music of the ancients may never be fully recovered, but in every heartbeat, in every breath of wind through trees, its rhythm still lingers. For as long as there have been humans, there has been the need to listen, and to make the world sing back. Section 2. The Voices of the Gods. Sacred Music and Ritual Sound. In every corner of the ancient world, music was more than art. It was a language of devotion. To play, to sing, to strike a drum or hum a note was not merely to express feeling. It was to summon the unseen. Music was the bridge between the human and the divine, the echo of eternity vibrating through fragile mortal hands. And for many civilizations, it was believed that gods themselves sang first, and that humanity merely learned to imitate their harmonies. If you wandered into a temple at dawn thousands of years ago, the air would not be silent. You might hear a low hum, deep and resonant, reverberating through stone halls. That was the sound of priests calling to their gods, a vibration meant to awaken the sacred. In Egypt, for example, the earliest morning rituals began with sound, the beating of hand drums, the ringing of small cymbals, and the rhythmic chanting of hymns. These sounds were not random. Every note was prescribed, every rhythm intentional. The goal was to align the music with cosmic order, what the Egyptians called Ma'at, the balance that held the universe together. The goddess Hathor was considered the patroness of music, love, and joy, but her melodies had power beyond pleasure. When priests played the sistrum, a metallic rattle with a shimmering sound, they believed it could repel evil spirits and please the gods. The temple walls of Dendera and Philae show processions of musicians holding sistra before colossal statues, their motion both a prayer and an offering. The instrument's soft jingling, combined with chants and incense smoke, transformed the temple into something living, a breathing organism of rhythm and devotion. The Mesopotamians, too, filled their ziggurats with song. Clay tablets from ancient Sumer, inscribed with cuneiform notation, preserve what may be the oldest written music in the world. Hymns dedicated to Nikal, the goddess of orchards. The song, though fragmented, is haunting. Modern reconstructions reveal intervals unfamiliar to modern ears, creating a sense of suspended time, as if the melody itself were halfway between this world and another. When priests sang these hymns thousands of years ago, accompanied by lyres of gold and lapis lazuli, they were not performing. They were conversing with gods. The sacred vibration of sound was believed to carry the human plea upward to the heavens. Across the Aegean, in ancient Greece, the line between religion and music was nearly invisible. The Delphic hymns, written to honor Apollo, god of music and prophecy, were sung in his sanctuary, where the air was thick with incense and mystery. The Greeks believed that certain musical modes could evoke specific emotions, joy, courage, reverence, and that each was tied to divine forces. A Dorian melody could make one brave, a Phrygian one ecstatic. Plato even warned that the wrong kind of music could corrupt the soul. In Greek temples, priests and musicians used these modes with precision, seeking to tune not only their instruments, but also the minds of those who listened. One of the most striking aspects of ancient sacred music was how it intertwined with architecture. Temples were designed to amplify sound, to create resonance that seemed to come not just from human throats, but from the stones themselves. In the grand halls of Karnak in Egypt or Delphi in Greece, a single voice could echo endlessly, transformed into something unearthly. Even in prehistoric Europe, sites like Stonehenge show acoustic design. The placement of stones enhances low-frequency sound, producing a deep, droning hum when drums or voices are used inside the circle. These weren't coincidences. Ancient builders understood that to shape stone was to shape sound, and through sound, to shape the sacred. Further east, in ancient India, the Vedic chants formed the heartbeat of spiritual life. Passed down orally for millennia, these hymns were never written, but memorized perfectly, each note carrying specific vibrational significance. The Om, that simple resonant syllable, was believed to be the primordial sound from which the universe itself was born. When chanted correctly, it was said to align the chanter's spirit with the cosmos. Indian sages didn't just hear music, they experienced it as a form of communion. The human body was an instrument, the breath a sacred wind. To sing was to vibrate in harmony with creation itself. In China, ritual music was an instrument of cosmic order. The ancient Chinese concept of li, ritual propriety, and yue, music, were inseparable. Proper music ensured harmony between heaven and earth, ruler and subject, spirit and man. The tones of the bianzhong, a magnificent bronze bell set, were tuned according to cosmic principles. When struck, each bell released a note meant to correspond to the movements of celestial bodies. Emperors would commission grand performances during solstices or royal ceremonies, believing that the correct sound could maintain balance in the universe. An emperor who ruled with discordant music, however, risked cosmic disaster. But sacred sound wasn't always solemn. In Africa, ancient ritual music pulsed with rhythm, life itself beating through drums and rattles. Across Egypt, Nubia, and into sub-Saharan regions, percussion was more than entertainment. It was a dialogue with ancestors. Drummers could summon rain, heal the sick, or send messages across miles. The beating of the drum mirrored the beating of the human heart, and when dozens played together, it was said that the ancestors could hear their descendants calling. Among the Mayans, sound carried spiritual geometry. Their temples were constructed so that when one clacked before the steps of Chichen Itza, the echo resembled the chirp of a sacred bird, the Quetzal, a messenger between heaven and earth. Whether by accident or by extraordinary design, this acoustic illusion became part of ritual itself. Music here was not something performed inside temples. The temple was the instrument. In nearly every culture, sound marked the moment when the divine and the mortal touched. The voice, the drum, the flute, all were channels, and the act of making music was itself a form of transformation. To sing to a god was to step briefly into their realm, to borrow their voice for a heartbeat of time. Modern listeners often imagine ancient sacred music as soft, slow, and meditative, but evidence suggests it could be thunderous, overwhelming, even ecstatic. In Greek Dionysian rites, flutes shrieked, drums thundered, and participants danced in trance until dawn. In Egyptian processions, entire choirs of musicians filled the streets with sound. In Babylonian temples, dozens of harps and drums played in unison to mark lunar festivals. To them, divine presence wasn't whispered, it was felt, vibrating through bone and blood. What ties all these traditions together is the belief that sound is power. Whether whispered, chanted, or roared, sacred music shaped reality. It turned chaos into order, silence into meaning. And when ancient musicians lifted their instruments toward the sky, they weren't seeking applause, they were seeking eternity. To listen to those forgotten voices now, faintly reconstructed, lost in echoes, is to realize something profound. The divine, for them, was not somewhere far away. It lived in the resonance between two notes, in the trembling of air. Their gods didn't just speak, they sang. Section 3. The music of power, royal courts, warriors, and ancient spectacle. If sacred music was the sound of the heavens, then royal and military music was the voice of the earth, commanding, dramatic, and unrelenting. Across civilizations, rulers understood something subtle but powerful. Sound could shape emotion, unify armies, and project authority. Long before propaganda was written, it was heard. Music became a weapon and a crown all at once. The invisible current that carried power through palaces and battlefields alike. Imagine standing before the great gates of a Mesopotamian city around 2500 BCE. The morning air is thick with dust, and from the horizon comes a slow, growing rhythm. First, the deep heartbeat of drums, steady, deliberate. Then, a piercing blast of curved horns made of bronze and silver. The sound rolls through the streets before the army even appears. This wasn't merely a prelude to war. It was war. The ancient Sumerians and Assyrians used sound as a psychological weapon, filling the air with noise designed to terrify and awe. Soldiers marched to the beat of enormous frame drums, while trumpeters blew from towers to signal victory or warn of invasion. Archaeologists have even found horn fragments buried alongside soldiers, suggesting that music was as essential to battle as the sword itself. The Egyptians understood this too. In their processions, the pharaoh's entrance was accompanied by an orchestra of drums, sistrums, and long silver trumpets that gleamed like lightning under the sun. The Tutankhamun trumpets, discovered in the young king's tomb, still exist, and when one was played in the 20th century, for the first time in over 3,000 years, its sound was both haunting and regal, as if carrying the echo of a long-dead empire. These instruments weren't designed for melody. They were symbols of command. When they blared, it was the voice of the gods made manifest through royal power. In ancient China, music and politics were so closely intertwined that emperors used sound to define the moral order of their kingdoms. Every dynasty had its proper tone, a musical system tied to cosmic harmony. When a ruler played the correct notes, the world was in balance. When the tones fell into dissonance, chaos threatened. This wasn't poetic metaphor, but political belief. Grand court performances with hundreds of musicians, dancers, and bell players weren't simply entertainment. They were acts of governance. The emperor's orchestra represented the cosmos itself, with instruments symbolizing heaven and earth, sun and moon, virtue and justice. To strike a drum or bell out of sync was almost a spiritual offense. The bianzhong, an ancient Chinese set of tuned bronze bells, embodied this philosophy. Some of these instruments could produce more than 60 distinct pitches, played by teams of musicians with precise choreography. When the emperor hosted foreign emissaries, he would summon the orchestra, and as the bells rang out, the message was clear. This is the sound of order, of civilization, of the Middle Kingdom itself. Across the Mediterranean, music became the lifeblood of ceremony and spectacle. In ancient Greece and later Rome, sound accompanied every aspect of political and military life. Greek warriors marched to the rhythm of the auloi, double reed flutes that cut through the din of battle with hypnotic intensity. Spartans, in particular, were known for their use of music to synchronize movement. Their phalanxes advanced in perfect rhythm, shields flashing, spears thrusting as one, a human machine fueled by music. The beat eliminated fear, replacing it with unity. Aristotle himself noted that rhythm and song were tools for courage, for men move best when moved together. The Romans expanded this concept into grand theater. Their military bands, the cornicines and tubicines, used horns not just to inspire troops, but to control them. Each trumpet call had meaning: advance, retreat, regroup. In massive amphitheaters, music announced the emperor's presence, accompanied gladiators into combat, and filled the air during triumphal parades. Imagine tens of thousands of spectators, the roar of the crowd blending with the pulse of drums and the metallic cry of horns. To the Romans, sound was empire, organized, loud, and unignorable. Yet not all court music was martial. In palaces, rulers surrounded themselves with melodies meant to soothe, impress, and enchant. The courts of ancient Persia, for instance, were famed for their musicians. The Shah's private ensembles played on harps, lutes, and flutes of silver, weaving melodies that echoed through gardens and marble halls. Music was used to accompany poetry, often filled with themes of love, power, and eternity. The idea was that a wise ruler should not only conquer lands, but also emotions, and a beautifully played melody could demonstrate refinement, balance, and divine favor. In India, the royal courts of the Mauryan and Gupta empires cultivated intricate traditions of music tied to both philosophy and pleasure. Rulers like Chandragupta and Samudragupta were patrons of sound. Their palaces resonated with the veena and mridangam, string and drum instruments that symbolized intellect and control. Court musicians were expected not only to entertain, but to elevate the mind. Their compositions followed cosmic principles, each note associated with time, emotion, and season. At dawn, a raga would awaken the soul. At dusk, another would prepare it for reflection. Even the emperor's mood was said to shift with the mode being played. Meanwhile, in the north of Europe, power was expressed in a rawer, earthier way. Viking chieftains and Celtic kings used horns and war drums that could be heard for miles. The lure, a bronze horn found in Scandinavia, produced a low, powerful resonance like a distant storm. When multiple lures were played together across a battlefield or during a burial, their harmonics merged into an otherworldly drone. To the Norse, such sound was divine, a call to Odin, a roar that bridged the living and the dead. And while these cultures were divided by continents, all shared one truth: to rule meant to control sound. The ability to summon music, to make people move, tremble, or weep with a single note, was itself a form of dominion. Even silence could be weaponized. A ruler entering a silent hall, followed by the slow rise of a single drum beat, could command attention more effectively than any speech. There's also a fascinating intimacy to this kind of music. It wasn't always public. Ancient letters, murals, and poetry reveal that kings and queens often kept personal musicians close at hand. Cleopatra, for instance, was said to have had harpists play as she bathed in milk, the notes rising like perfume. Emperor Nero of Rome fancied himself a musician, performing with his lyre before terrified audiences who dared not applaud too soon. In Han China, concubines and musicians performed duets for the emperor under moonlight, their songs documenting not power, but longing. If we could travel back and listen to these sounds, the thunder of a war drum, the crystal tones of bronze bells, the whisper of silk strings in a marble hall, we might realize that ancient power wasn't only seen in gold or stone. It was heard in rhythm, resonance, and silence. Music did not merely decorate power, it defined it. The sound of empire was not a single note, but a symphony of control, ritual, discipline, majesty, and fear intertwined. And as the echoes of those horns and flutes fade into time, one truth remains. In the ancient world, music was never neutral. It was always saying something about who ruled, who followed, and who dared to listen. Section 4. Songs of the Common People, the Forgotten Voices of Ancient Streets. While the grand halls of kings echoed with polished harmonies, the truest sounds of the ancient world often rose from humbler places, the marketplaces, workshops, taverns, and dusty roads. This was the music of the people, unrecorded, improvised, and fleeting as a breath. It wasn't written on scrolls or carved in stone. It lived only in the air, passed from one voice to another, vanishing into the night as easily as laughter. Imagine walking through the crowded streets of ancient Athens at midday. The sun is bright and hot, and the scent of olives and fish fills the air. Merchants call out their prices in a rhythmic chant that sounds almost like a melody. A potter hums softly as he shapes clay, his tune following the circular rhythm of his wheel. Down by the harbor, sailors unload amphorae to the beat of shouted work songs, rough, simple, and full of life. This was music not for glory or the gods, but for motion, for getting through the day. Ancient writers occasionally hint at these songs. They speak of shepherds' flutes echoing in the hills, of girls singing as they gathered flowers, of farmers using music to calm oxen while plowing. The instruments were modest, pipes made from reeds or bones, hand drums fashioned from stretched hide, and simple string tools like the lyre or the pharynx, often played while storytelling. These songs were rarely composed in the way we think of music now. Instead, they were spontaneous, growing out of the moment, shaped by mood, by work, by weather. In Rome, music filled every corner of urban life. Street performers known as Tibacenes played flutes during feasts and processions, while taverns echoed with tunes of longing, rebellion, or mischief. Archaeologists have uncovered graffiti from Pompeii, showing small notations or lyrics, proof that even the poorest citizens had their own songs. In some cases, these were political, short, sharp verses mocking the powerful. In others, they were deeply personal, laments for lost lovers or toasts to absent friends. What's remarkable is how similar this was to modern folk traditions. The melodies might have been different, but the spirit was the same. People using sound to turn ordinary life into something bearable, even beautiful. A fisherman in ancient Egypt would whistle while casting his net. A washerwoman on the banks of the Nile might keep time with the slap of wet linen, her rhythm merging with the river's flow. The sistrum, that ancient rattle of bronze discs, was not only for temple rites. Common women used smaller versions at festivals or family gatherings. It was both prayer and play. In Northern Europe, where winters were long and dark, music served as warmth. Celtic villagers passed down songs around the fire, their melodies built on repetitive hypnotic patterns. These weren't just tunes, they were memory. A ballad could preserve local history, keeping alive the deeds of ancestors who had no written legacy. Music was the community's library, its newspaper, its heartbeat. In ancient China, folk music was so valued that imperial scholars were once ordered to travel the countryside collecting songs. The idea was that the people's tunes reflected the moral health of the nation. If songs were joyful, the realm was prosperous. If they were mournful, it meant the empire was sick. These collections, known as the Book of Songs, preserve the oldest folk verses in human history. One poem describes a young woman weaving and waiting for her lover by the river. Another tells of farmers complaining about taxes. Both are thousands of years old, yet still sound startlingly familiar. The same was true in ancient Japan, where traveling poets and musicians known as biwa hoshi wandered from town to town, reciting epic tales to the sound of their stringed instruments. Though many performed for nobles, just as many played for villagers, weaving local gossip and myth into verse. In this way, folk music became a living bridge between classes, uniting society through shared sound. In Africa, the griots, keepers of oral history, performed a similar role. Their songs were not merely entertainment, but preservation. A single griot could recount centuries of lineage through rhythm and melody. Their instruments, such as the kora or ngoni, carried the voices of ancestors. It's possible that even in ancient Egypt and Nubia, Similar traditions thrived, for carved reliefs show harpists and singers whose faces are alive with storytelling, as if their music held truths that writing could not capture. Music was also medicine. In many cultures, it was believed that the right sound could heal the body or calm the spirit. Roman physicians sometimes prescribed certain melodies for melancholy or sleeplessness. Egyptian priests chanted to soothe pain and guide the dying toward the afterlife. In rural Greece, lullabies doubled as protection spells, keeping evil spirits from entering the dreams of infants. These songs were passed from mother to daughter, their words slightly changing with each generation, but their comfort enduring. Even more fascinating are the fragments we've recovered, tiny echoes of these forgotten voices. A few clay tablets, scratched with marks that represent musical notation, survive from ancient Mesopotamia. When reconstructed, the tunes are surprisingly gentle. Minor scales, slow tempos, and repeating phrases that feel almost modern in their melancholy. Listening to them, one senses the universal ache of ordinary life, the same longing and joy we still sing about today. It's worth remembering that most ancient people never heard the grand symphonies of kings or priests. Their music was made with their own hands, in their own homes, beside their own fires. It was deeply human, sometimes joyous, sometimes weary, but always alive. When the day ended, people sang to forget their troubles, to celebrate the harvest, or to honor their dead. The walls of time may have silenced their instruments, but the impulse remains. The songs of the common people didn't aim to impress, they simply were. And perhaps that's what made them eternal. These were melodies that rose with the smoke of hearths, carried by wind, fading into starlight. If we could hear them now, we might not recognize the notes, but we would recognize the feeling. The sound of community, of survival, of being together in the vast uncertainty of existence. In those forgotten alleys and distant fields, the real music of history was played. Not in marble halls, but in the heartbeat of the crowd, the whisper of lovers, the rhythm of work and rest. It was the song of humanity itself. Section 5, Echoes of the Divine, Music, Myth, and the Voice of the Gods. For ancient civilizations, music was never merely art. It was a bridge between the mortal and the divine. The ancients believed sound itself carried spiritual power, a vibration that connected heaven and earth, life and death, body and soul. To sing, to play, to listen, these acts were not passive. They were sacred. In the echo of the drum or the cry of a flute, ancient people believed they could hear the presence of the gods. In ancient Egypt, this belief was woven into the very heart of religion. Every temple had its own musicians, often priestesses of Hathor, the goddess of music, love, and joy. They played sistra, those delicate metal rattles whose shimmering sound was said to please the gods and ward off chaos. The tones were bright, like sunlight glancing off the Nile, and each rattle of bronze or shell symbolized renewal, the sound of life triumphing over disorder. During sacred rituals, harps and flutes joined the rhythm of the priests' chants. These melodies were not meant for human pleasure alone. They were offerings of vibration. To the Egyptians, the world itself had begun in sound. The god Thoth, it was said, spoke creation into being with a divine word. In that myth, music became not an invention, but the origin of existence. The Greeks, too, believed that the gods themselves were musicians. Apollo, god of music and prophecy, held the lyre as his eternal symbol. while Orpheus, the mortal musician, could charm not only humans, but animals, trees, and even stones. His songs were said to soften the hearts of the Furies and move the gods themselves to tears. When Orpheus descended into the underworld to rescue his beloved Eurydice, it was through music alone that he gained passage, his lyre's gentle notes calming the spirits of the dead. Such myths reveal how the ancients saw music as something greater than sound. It was persuasion, transformation, even resurrection. To play music was to harness a divine language older than words. Pythagoras, the philosopher and mathematician, believed that the cosmos itself was built on musical ratios, that every planet moved in harmony, producing a vast, inaudible symphony called the music of the spheres. This cosmic orchestra, though never heard by human ears, shaped everything, from the orbit of stars to the pulse of human life. In Mesopotamia, the world's earliest written songs were also prayers. Clay tablets from over 3,000 years ago preserve hymns to the goddess Inanna, performed by priestesses known as Gala. These chants were structured, repetitive, and hypnotic. The repetition was not monotony, but a way to enter trance. The singer and the listener were both transformed by rhythm. Archaeologists have found fragments of cuneiform notation, small, precise marks that tell us how high or low each note should be. When reconstructed, the melodies are haunting, slow, solemn, and strangely modern. Listening to them today feels like standing at the threshold of something sacred, something half forgotten, yet timeless. In India, music's connection to the divine was even more explicit. The Vedas, among the oldest sacred texts in the world, were not written to be read, they were meant to be sung. Each syllable, each intonation, carried spiritual power. The precision of pitch and rhythm was essential because the sound itself was the prayer. Ancient Indian thinkers described the universe as born from the vibration of Om, the primal sound. Everything, matter, energy, emotion, was seen as resonance. In this worldview, music wasn't a reflection of divinity. It was divinity. China too revered this idea of harmony as a cosmic principle. The philosopher Confucius wrote that music could either uphold or destroy order in the world. A ruler's virtue was mirrored in the tone of his court's music. If it was balanced and solemn, the empire was at peace. If it was dissonant or wild, the state was in decay. The five-tone Chinese scale, based on mathematical relationships, symbolized the five elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Thus, playing a melody was a form of aligning oneself and the state with the rhythm of the universe. In ancient Israel, the Psalms were sung with harps and lyres during temple ceremonies, their melodies designed to guide emotion toward transcendence. King David himself was said to soothe King Saul's troubled mind through song, and in later mysticism, such as the Kabbalistic tradition, every Hebrew letter was associated with a sound, each vibration part of the hidden architecture of creation. To chant was to touch the divine alphabet of the cosmos. Across the ocean, the peoples of Mesoamerica used music in rituals that connected them to their gods and ancestors. Aztec priests played enormous drums, huehuetil, whose deep, rolling tones echoed like thunder. The sound symbolized the heartbeat of the gods and was often accompanied by flutes made of bone or clay, creating eerie, high-pitched cries that represented spirits or winds. These sounds were not beautiful in the modern sense. They were meant to be powerful, to summon the unseen. To the Aztecs, music was a living force. It could heal, bless, or destroy. Even the Norse peoples, in their frozen northern realms, believed that song carried magic. The Gulder, an ancient form of chanting, was said to influence fate itself. Warriors sang to invoke protection. Sorceresses sang to weave spells. The sagas tell of gods and mortals using song to control nature, to calm storms, to bind enemies, to recall the dead. The rhythm of the chant, combined with breath and intention, blurred the line between music and incantation. Throughout all these cultures, one theme remains constant. Music was not entertainment, but communication with the sacred. It was the unseen made audible. Each tone was a prayer, each vibration a thread in the fabric of creation. The ancients didn't just hear music. They felt it as a force that moved through them, like wind or water. When modern musicians reconstruct these lost sounds, from Egyptian harps to Greek alloy, from Chinese guqin to Mesopotamian lyres, they often describe an overwhelming feeling of awe. The scales are unfamiliar, the rhythms unpredictable, yet something ancient stirs. Perhaps it is memory. Perhaps it is the echo of what our ancestors once believed, that when we make music, we are not merely creating, we are remembering. For in every plucked string, in every breath of flute or whisper of drum, there lingers a truth the ancients never forgot, that sound is sacred and silence is divine. Section 6. Lost Instruments. The Forgotten Sounds of the Ancient World. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing in the middle of a desert at dusk. The air cooling, the sky painted in fading gold. From somewhere far beyond the dunes, a faint sound drifts toward you. The soft, trembling cry of a string being plucked, or a breath through a reed that trembles like a sigh. The melody is strange, unfamiliar, yet hauntingly human. That sound, fragile and ancient, might once have come from an instrument now lost to time. The story of ancient instruments is a story of ghosts. Many of them vanished long ago, broken, buried, or forgotten when empires fell. What remains are fragments: a splinter of wood, a bronze tuning peg, a hollowed bone flute. From these silent pieces, archaeologists and musicians try to breathe life back into history's long-lost music. And what they've discovered reveals a world of sound far richer and stranger than we could imagine. One of the earliest known instruments is the flute of Geisenklosterli, found in a cave in Germany and carved from the wing bone of a vulture. It's over 40,000 years old, older than civilization itself. When replicas are played, their tones are pure and mournful, not unlike the notes of a modern recorder, but softer, more fragile. It's extraordinary to think that before the written word, before the wheel, our ancestors were already shaping the wind into song. For them, music wasn't leisure. It was life, a way to connect to nature and to each other in a world that was vast and wild. As civilizations rose, instruments evolved into reflections of their cultures. The Egyptians, for instance, created elegant harps with sweeping wooden frames, often decorated with gold and turquoise. These harps were placed in tombs to accompany the dead in the afterlife. Some were small enough to cradle in one's arms. Others stood taller than a man. The strings were made from sheep gut, producing tones that shimmered like water. When modern researchers rebuilt these instruments and played them beneath the stone ceilings of ancient temples, the acoustics created a mesmerizing effect. The sound multiplied, circling the room, as if the air itself remembered the prayer. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, music was already organized and deeply symbolic. Archaeologists have unearthed magnificent instruments like the lyre of Ur, discovered in the royal tombs over 4,500 years old. Its body was covered in gold and lapis lazuli, adorned with a bull's head, symbolizing strength and divinity. When reconstructed, the lyre produces a sound that is gentle but commanding, a blend of resonance and silence that feels almost sacred. To the Sumerians, the lyre was not only a musical tool, but a symbol of order. The strings represented harmony in the universe, each note a piece of divine structure. From the ancient Aegean islands, we find the double-piped aulos, an instrument that was both loved and feared by the Greeks. It was said to have been invented by the goddess Athena, who discarded it after seeing how it distorted her face while playing. The aulos was powerful, sharp, almost piercing, and used in everything from battle marches to theatrical performances. It carried a hypnotic energy, capable of stirring emotion and ecstasy. When reconstructed and played today, it produces a trembling, intense sound, something between a bagpipe and a clarinet, but ancient and raw, like a voice from the deep past. In China, the soundscape was shaped by a quest for balance. Instruments like the guqin, a 7-string zither, were revered as the instrument of scholars and sages. Its soft, whispering tones reflected the Confucian ideal of restraint and inner harmony. The notes are delicate, fading almost as soon as they are born, like ripples in still water. For thousands of years, playing the guqin was not just about music, but meditation, an act of aligning oneself with the rhythm of heaven and earth. To listen to it even now feels like hearing the breath of time itself, sound that is barely there, yet impossibly deep. But not all ancient instruments were gentle or refined. Some were wild, thunderous, and meant to shake the earth. The Aztecs built drums so large that their beats could be heard across entire cities. The huetl, carved from a single tree trunk, produced a deep, pulsing rhythm used in ceremonies to summon the gods. Other drums were made from human skin, a reminder that for these ancient people, sound and sacrifice were intertwined. The eerie, high-pitched death whistles found in Aztec tombs, when blown, mimic the screams of the dying. Played during rituals, they likely symbolized the cries of souls entering the afterlife. Listening to them today is chilling, but also mesmerizing, an echo of a worldview where life and death were never separate, but part of the same cosmic song. In the Indus Valley and later in ancient India, instruments like the veena and bansuri flute emerged, forming the foundation of one of the world's most continuous musical traditions. The veena, with its long, resonant body and vibrating strings, was said to be played by the goddess Saraswati herself, the deity of wisdom and art. Its tone is warm and meditative, designed not just to please the ear, but to elevate the spirit. Even today, traditional Indian music follows the same principles that guided its ancient roots, the belief that every sound has emotional and cosmic significance. Each note, or raga, carries a specific mood and time of day: sunrise, dusk, monsoon, a way of tuning the human soul to the rhythm of nature. Some of the most mysterious ancient instruments come from places that still hold secrets beneath the earth. In Etruscan tombs, archaeologists have found bronze trumpets shaped like serpents, perhaps used in funerary rites. In Scythian burial mounds, small lyres carved from horse bones were discovered, suggesting a nomadic people who carried their music across the endless steppes. And in the frozen north, the Finnish jauhikko, a primitive bowed lyre, echoes the winds of a world where music was both protection and storytelling, a way to make sense of long winters and endless night. When these instruments are played again, reconstructed from shards and engravings, from broken reeds and sketches, something remarkable happens. The sound does not simply recreate history, it resurrects emotion. You can feel within the tones the same desires, fears, and hopes that moved those ancient hands thousands of years ago. Music becomes a time machine, but not one of metal and gears, one of vibration and air. Modern archaeomusicologists describe this experience with awe. When they pluck the strings of the lyre of or blow across a bone flute carved by Ice Age hunters, they often say the same thing. It doesn't feel like we are making sound. It feels like the sound is finding us. Perhaps that's the most haunting truth about lost instruments. They remind us that music was never just human creation. It was collaboration between air and hand, between past and present, between silence and sound. The music of the ancient world is gone, yet it lingers in echoes, in reconstructions, in the spaces between our modern notes. And when we listen closely, with imagination and reverence, we might just hear it again, faint but eternal, the voice of time, singing softly through the ages. Section 7. Reconstructing the Past. How Scientists Bring Ancient Music Back to Life. Imagine standing in a laboratory that feels half like a temple, half like a workshop. The air hums softly with the buzz of delicate machines. But somewhere in the corner, a single haunting note rises, not from a computer or speaker, but from a replica of an instrument that hasn't been heard in thousands of years. This is the strange and beautiful world of archaeomusicology, the science of resurrecting ancient sound. While archaeology usually deals in bones, pottery, and ruins, archaeomusicology deals in the invisible, in vibrations, tones, and echoes. Its practitioners are part scientist, part artist, and part detective. Their goal is not just to recreate what ancient instruments looked like, but to understand what their music felt like, to let the past sing again. It all begins with fragments. A piece of wood buried in a tomb, a cracked clay flute found near a riverbank, a painting on the wall of a forgotten temple showing a musician mid-song. To most eyes, these are curiosities, but to an archaeomusicologist, they are clues, the faint fingerprints of sound. Every discovery tells a story. For example, when archaeologists uncovered the lyres of in modern-day Iraq, they found not just instruments, but a puzzle, strings missing, wood rotted away, but the golden frames still gleaming. The question was, how did they sound? Researchers turned to ancient carvings, where they found depictions of players holding similar instruments. By analyzing the length of the surviving string pegs and comparing them to later lyres, they began to reconstruct the likely tuning system. Then came the moment of truth, when the first replica was strung and played. The tones that filled the air were soft, almost sorrowful, shimmering like sunlight on still water. The sound was delicate, but full of gravity, the voice of a civilization reborn through patience and imagination. Modern technology has become one of the most powerful tools in this revival. Using 3D scanning, scientists can model fragile artifacts without touching them. This allows them to rebuild missing pieces with stunning precision. For example, flutes made from bird bones, found in caves across Europe and Asia, can now be digitally mapped to determine the precise placement and size of their holes. Once replicas are printed or carved, musicians can test different tunings to find the sweet spot, the point where the sound feels balanced, natural, and intentional. When that happens, it's as though time itself exhales. But there's more to this process than data and measurements. Sound depends on emotion, and emotion, unlike artifacts, cannot be excavated. So, researchers often turn to the cultures themselves for guidance. They study ancient writings, poetry, and even myths to understand what music meant to the people who made it. The Greeks, for instance, believed that certain scales could influence a person's soul. Egyptian texts describe music as a bridge between the living and the divine. The ancient Chinese saw it as an echo of cosmic harmony. By combining these cultural insights with physical evidence, scientists can craft not only the instruments, but the intention behind them. One fascinating example comes from ancient Greece, where researchers have reconstructed the aulos, a double-piped instrument that once filled amphitheaters and battlefields alike. The problem? Ancient texts described its sound as terrible and divine. Yet early reconstructions sounded more like two flutes played badly together. It wasn't until scientists analyzed the ancient reeds under a microscope and realized they were shaped very differently from modern ones that the true voice of the aulos returned. When played with the correct ancient reeds, its tone became haunting and powerful, a mix of harmony and chaos, evoking both fear and ecstasy. Listeners often describe the experience as otherworldly, as if the sound vibrates not only in the air, but in the bones. In some cases, even ancient notation systems have survived, though they're cryptic and incomplete. The oldest known piece of written music, the Hurrian Hymn No. 6, was discovered on a clay tablet in Ugarit, modern-day Syria, dating back over 3,400 years. The inscription, written in cuneiform, includes instructions for a singer and a harpist. For decades, scholars debated how to interpret it. Was it a scale, a melody, or simply a ritual chant? Eventually, after years of study, musicians reconstructed it as a serene, repeating pattern that feels both alien and familiar. When performed today, the song carries a strange beauty, its rhythm irregular, its notes suspended between sadness and peace. Listening to it, one feels a chill. This might be the oldest song on earth that still has a voice. Elsewhere, in Egyptian tombs and Roman villas, frescoes depict musicians playing instruments that no longer exist. From these images, 3D artists and sound engineers work together to recreate how those instruments might have looked and sounded. They model the acoustics of ancient spaces too. The echo inside a temple, the resonance in a stone courtyard, because the sound of ancient music was never just about the instrument itself. It was about where it was played. In vast stone halls or open-air arenas, music wasn't simply heard, it was felt, vibrating through the body, like a pulse shared by everyone present. Perhaps the most astonishing reconstructions, however, come from the sounds of silence, instruments that left no trace at all. For instance, many wooden flutes, drums, and stringed instruments decayed completely over time. Yet, by studying surviving artworks and comparing them with instruments from nearby cultures, researchers can make educated guesses about their shape and function. The results are speculative, but they open doors to possibilities. sounds that might have once accompanied births, marriages, harvests, or war. Every experiment becomes an act of resurrection, where art and science meet in reverence. Some musicians go even further. They don't just reconstruct ancient instruments, they compose new music in the ancient styles, guided by fragments of melody and rhythm that have survived. Using flutes from 3000 BCE or harps modeled after Egyptian originals, they create entire concerts designed to immerse audiences in the soundscape of lost worlds. When these performances take place, often in old stone churches, desert ruins, or caves, something magical happens. The echoes feel ancient, timeless, alive. It's not just performance, it's communion across millennia. This field also teaches a humbling truth, that every sound we make is fleeting, but the desire to create sound, to turn silence into meaning, is eternal. Whether it's the hollow call of a own flute or the deep vibration of a lyre string, music has always been our way of reaching beyond ourselves. As archaeomusicologists often say, their work isn't about nostalgia or novelty, it's about continuity. They're not trying to mimic the past, they're letting the past remind us of something we've forgotten, that music is not bound by time. It flows through it. In the end, every reconstructed melody, every resurrected tone is a whisper from our ancestors. When you hear that first trembling note from a 3,000-year-old instrument, you realize something extraordinary. The distance between them and us is not as vast as it seems. The sound bridges it, effortlessly, tenderly. Across empires, across ages, the same simple truth endures. We have always needed music to remember who we are. Section 8. The music of gods and mortals. The spiritual power of sound in antiquity. To the ancient world, music was not merely art. It was power. It wasn't background entertainment, nor was it confined to celebrations or leisure. Instead, music was woven into the very fabric of existence, a sacred force that shaped emotion, behavior, nature, and even destiny itself. The ancients believed that sound could heal, destroy, summon gods, or command the hearts of men. Every note, every vibration, was part of the unseen order of the universe. If you could travel back 2,000 or 3,000 years and listen to a single moment of music in an Egyptian temple or a Greek sanctuary, you wouldn't just be hearing sound, you'd be witnessing prayer in its purest form. The Egyptian harmony of heaven and earth. In ancient Egypt, music was the breath of the gods. It was said that when the god Thoth spoke the world into being, his words carried melody, and when the goddess Hathor played her sistrum, a sacred rattle adorned with the faces of deities, she calmed storms and brought fertility to the land. Musicians in Egypt weren't entertainers, they were spiritual intermediaries, charged with maintaining harmony between heaven and earth. In temples, they performed daily rituals using harps, flutes, and sistra to awaken the statues of gods. Every sound had a purpose. The deep resonance of drums echoed the heartbeat of creation. The tinkling of metal symbolized the stars' eternal dance. It was believed that certain notes had the ability to ward off evil spirits or bring the listener closer to divine truth. During funerary rites, priests would chant ancient hymns accompanied by the sekma, a kind of harp, to guide the soul safely to the afterlife. In those dark chambers filled with incense smoke and flickering torchlight, music wasn't for the living alone. It was a bridge between the seen and unseen. Imagine the haunting beauty of it, the slow, rhythmic strum of a harp, the delicate shaking of the sistrum, and the human voice rising in sacred cadence, calling not for applause, but for eternal balance. Greece, where sound sculpted the soul. If Egypt saw music as divine order, Greece saw it as divine philosophy. The Greeks were obsessed with harmony, not just musical harmony, but cosmic harmony. For them, music mirrored the structure of the universe itself. Pythagoras, the philosopher and mathematician, believed that planets moved according to a kind of celestial music, the music of the spheres. Though it couldn't be heard by human ears, he claimed it influenced everything from the growth of crops to the moods of men. The same mathematical ratios that governed musical intervals, he said, governed the cosmos. To the Greeks, music could shape ethos, one's inner character. The philosopher Plato warned that the wrong kind of music could corrupt society, while the right kind could strengthen it. He believed melodies in certain modes inspired courage, while others bred weakness. In his ideal city, music was education, a moral teacher that molded the soul. At religious festivals like those of Dionysus, the music was wild, ecstatic, and untamed, designed to break down barriers between human and divine. Drums thundered, aloi wailed, and choruses sang until their voices cracked. For a few sacred hours, music dissolved the self. People became one with the god of wine, of passion, of life's uncontrollable pulse. And yet, in contrast, the Greeks also valued restraint. The same civilization that celebrated Dionysian chaos also revered Apollo, the god of measured beauty, of the lyre and logic. Between Dionysus and Apollo, between frenzy and reason, the Greeks found balance. And that balance was music itself. To play music in ancient Greece was not to perform, but to participate in the cosmic order. Rome, the sound of empire and eternity. When the Romans inherited the traditions of Greece and Egypt, they turned music into spectacle. Grand, dramatic, and deeply symbolic, Roman music filled temples, theaters, and triumphal processions. The emperors understood its psychological power. A single trumpet blast could silence a crowd or ignite 1,000 soldiers' courage. In Roman religion, music accompanied nearly every ceremony: weddings, funerals, sacrifices, and games. But it also became a political weapon. A parade of musicians, horns, drums, lyres, and cymbals was used to project the empire's authority. The blare of a cornu, a massive curved horn, could echo across a battlefield, signaling unity and divine sanction. Yet, Rome's connection to music was not just martial. Many Romans believed that melodies could influence fate itself. In private villas, musicians played delicate harp pieces meant to attract good fortune or heal emotional wounds. Wealthy patrons often hosted small gatherings called convivia, where poets and musicians performed to blur the line between philosophy and pleasure. In temples, hymns were sung to Jupiter and Mars in sonorous, repetitive tones designed to induce a trance-like focus, a collective rhythm that reminded citizens that their empire, too, was a harmony of voices. The East, music as medicine and meditation. Far beyond the Mediterranean, in the ancient cultures of India, China, and Persia, music was viewed as an expression of universal order and spiritual truth. In India, the sacred texts known as the Vedas describe sound, not a Brahma, as the very vibration of creation. Everything that exists, they believed, is made of sound. Each tone carries a particular energy. Each chant aligns the soul with the cosmos. The 7 musical notes corresponded to the 7 chakras, or energy centers, in the human body. To sing or play was to heal, not to perform. In ancient China, philosophers like Confucius wrote that music shaped moral harmony. He warned rulers that if their people sang in chaos, their governance was corrupt. But if their songs were gentle and ordered, the empire would prosper. The guqin, a seven-stringed zither, was revered not for entertainment, but for introspection. It was said that its soft, whispering notes could align a person's heart with heaven. In Persia, meanwhile, the magi, priestly scholars, used music in rituals of astronomy and healing. The chang, an ancient Persian harp, was believed to mirror the harmony of the stars, and each string represented a different planet. Music wasn't confined to festivals or temples. It was written into the cosmos itself. The universal prayer across all these civilizations, the connection between sound and spirit was unmistakable. Whether it was the Egyptians shaking their sistra to awaken gods, the Greeks balancing soul through scales, or the Indians chanting to vibrate with creation, music served one timeless purpose: to make the invisible visible. It was a sacred technology that bridged silence and speech, heaven and earth, mortality and eternity. It wasn't just meant to entertain, it was meant to remind humanity that it was part of something greater, a living rhythm pulsing through all things. When we listen to reconstructed ancient instruments today, the hum of a lyre, the sigh of a flute, the deep pulse of a drum, we are not just hearing what ancient people heard. We are feeling what they felt: awe, reverence, connection. For them, music was the most honest language the universe had ever spoken. Section 9. Songs of Power and War. The battle music of the ancient world. Before the clash of swords and the thunder of hooves, there was always music. Across thousands of years, before a single arrow was loosed or shield was lifted, armies around the world were guided, even possessed by sound. To ancient civilizations, music wasn't simply accompaniment to war. It was war's pulse. It carried orders, inspired courage, invoked gods, and in many ways, determined the fate of battles long before the fighting began. When you strip away the modern noise of engines and explosions, and imagine instead a dawn-lit battlefield, where men stand shoulder to shoulder, under banners of bronze and leather, the first thing you would hear is not silence, but rhythm. The deliberate pounding of drums, the sharp cry of horns, the chants of warriors whose hearts beat in perfect time with the music of war. The heartbeat of empire. Egypt and Mesopotamia. In ancient Egypt, the army's power was built on coordination and divine confidence. Before each campaign, priests performed musical rituals in temples, summoning the protection of deities like Montu, the falcon-headed god of war. Soldiers marched not to random noise, but to carefully measured drumbeats and trumpet blasts, sounds that echoed the order of the cosmos itself. The Egyptians believed that battle, like the universe, must have rhythm. The thud of drums was more than morale. It was the physical manifestation of unity. Each soldier moved not as an individual, but as part of a living, breathing organism. Even pharaohs were depicted holding the sheneb, a kind of sacred drum, to show that their rule and their army was in harmony with divine vibration. Further east, in Mesopotamia, war was a divine act written in sound. Ancient tablets described the use of lyres, horns, and rhythmic chanting before combat. Kings like Sargon of Akkad and Ashurbanipal marched to the thunder of massive frame drums and the eerie drone of reed instruments. These sounds weren't random. They mimicked the storms of the god Adad or the lion's roar of Ishtar. To hear such music echo across the plains of Mesopotamia must have been otherworldly. The low hum of trumpets, the booming of drums, and the chant of thousands of voices, not in panic, but in ceremony. It was said that the gods themselves could hear such sounds and favor the side whose rhythm best reflected divine order. Greece, the discipline of sound and formation. When we imagine Greek warfare, we think of the phalanx, rows of soldiers moving like a single wall of bronze and muscle. What held that wall together, even more than strength, was rhythm. Each step, each thrust of the spear, was guided by music. The Spartans, especially, were renowned for marching into battle with flutes playing, a haunting, deliberate melody that kept their formation tight and their minds clear. It's said that this ritualized sound prevented fear from spreading. The enemy heard calm music. The Spartans felt divine focus. In their minds, they weren't walking into chaos. They were performing a sacred dance. The Athenian navy used a similar practice. A musician known as the Kelustes kept time with a drum or hammer, signaling when oars should rise and fall. Without this rhythm, the fleet's movements would collapse. With it, hundreds of ships moved in perfect synchronization, a deadly harmony gliding across the sea. Even the theater, for which Greece is famous, was influenced by this military rhythm. The chorus, the chants, the careful pacing of tragedy and triumph, all were born from the same understanding that sound was structure and structure was power. Rome, the empire of noise. The Romans turned military music into technology. They developed a complex system of signals and instruments designed to command vast legions with sound alone. At the front of every Roman formation stood the cornican, the hornblower, and the tubican, who played the long bronze tuba. These were not musical for pleasure. They were instruments of order. Each sound corresponded to a specific command: advance, retreat, turn, or prepare to charge. But their effect went far beyond communication. The Roman historian Polybius described the terrifying roar of these horns before battle, a mix of brass and shouting, so intense it made the ground seem to shake. It was psychological warfare. Imagine standing in the early morning mist, hearing the piercing cry of 1,000 Roman horns rolling across the hills. Even before seeing their shields glitter in the light, you would already feel defeated. And yet, Rome's musical mastery wasn't only used for war. Victorious generals held triumphs, great parades where the same instruments that once sounded destruction now played to celebrate divine favor. The music of Rome was the music of empire, loud, precise, commanding, eternal. The Far East, war as ritual, sound as spirit. Across Asia, ancient armies also moved to the pulse of ritualized sound, though often with a spiritual focus. In China, music was used not just for coordination, but for moral alignment. The philosopher Confucius taught that music leads to harmony, and harmony leads to victory. Before battle, generals would hold ceremonies with drums, bells, and flutes to purify their armies of chaos. The sound was meant to bring unity between the soldiers' hearts and the mandate of heaven. Chinese armies carried bianzhong, great bronze bells, and taiko-like drums whose thunder could be heard miles away. The rhythm was everything, steady, unbroken, divine. When the beat began, soldiers no longer felt like individuals. They became waves in a tide of destiny. In Japan, early samurai carried this concept forward. Before combat, they would perform war chants and blow the horigai, a conch shell horn, whose long, mournful note was believed to summon divine attention. The sound rolled over misty valleys like the voice of a spirit, calm yet commanding, natural yet transcendent. The tribal pulse. the music of fear and fire. Among the Celts, Vikings, and Germanic tribes, music served an entirely different purpose: chaos as weapon. While Greeks and Romans used order, the northern tribes wielded terror. Warriors painted in blue would scream battle hymns, pound drums, and blow curved horns known as carnyxes. These tall bronze instruments, often shaped like dragon heads, emitted piercing, animalistic howls that echoed across forests and hills. Roman soldiers described the sound as unearthly, like the cry of demons. And that was the point. It was music made to unnerve, to awaken primal fear. But it was also sacred. The Celts believed the carnyx connected the mortal warrior to the spirit of the animal it represented: a boar, a dragon, or a wolf. When they played, they became that creature, unstoppable and wild. The Vikings, too, used chants and drums to summon battle frenzy. Their word for this state, berserker, literally means bare shirt, and through rhythm, they believed they could channel animal strength. Their songs weren't melodic. They were elemental, made of breath, bone, and heartbeat. The echo that never died. What unites all these cultures is not just the music itself, but the intention behind it. For the ancients, battle music was not about beauty. It was about transformation. It turned fear into courage, chaos into rhythm, and mortality into meaning. The same sound that signaled death also symbolized divine favor. In the rhythm of drums and the cry of horns, people found proof that even in destruction, there was order, that war, like life, had a pattern. And when the noise faded, when the battlefield fell silent except for the wind, those echoes lingered. Even now, when archaeologists uncover fragments of ancient horns or drums, and modern musicians attempt to play them again, that same pulse can still be felt, distant, haunting, but alive. It's the sound of history's heartbeat, and perhaps the faint echo of the gods who once listened. Section 10. Lost Instruments and Forgotten Sounds. Reconstructing the voices of the past. For thousands of years, music was born from fragile things: wood, bone, gut, clay, and air. Time, with its silent patience, devours such materials easily. Strings snap, reeds crumble, drums turn to dust. And yet somehow, echoes remain. In carved stone, in faint drawings on broken pottery, in the hollow bones of instruments buried with kings, we can still hear the whispers of a world that once sang. But to reconstruct those voices, to revive the music of people who lived millennia ago, requires more than archaeology. It demands imagination, intuition, and an almost spiritual sensitivity, a willingness to listen, not just to sound, but to silence. The oldest song in the world. It begins in ancient Mesopotamia, around 3,400 years ago. In the ruins of the city of Ugarit, archaeologists unearthed a clay tablet inscribed with cuneiform symbols. Not words of war or trade, but notes. It was a hymn, a piece of music written for the goddess Nicole, the Lady of Orchards. When researchers deciphered it, they discovered the world's oldest known melody, played on a reconstructed lyre. Its sound is delicate, like the wind through reeds, or water dripping from stone. The notes rise and fall slowly, following patterns unlike any modern scale. Listening to it feels almost unreal. It's as if the centuries fold in on themselves, as if someone from another age is singing softly just beyond the veil of time. The hymn to Nicole tells us something extraordinary, that ancient people didn't only think or pray. They composed. They understood beauty, tone, and rhythm in ways that transcend language. Even in a world lit by oil lamps and filled with gods of thunder and stone, they sought harmony. The lyre of Ur and the voice of kings. Nearby in the royal cemetery of Ur, dating to around 2500 BCE, archaeologists discovered magnificent lyres, harps adorned with gold, silver, and lapis lazuli. These were not mere instruments, they were sacred devices, connecting kings to the divine through vibration. The Great Lyre of Ur is perhaps the most famous. It has the head of a bull, symbol of power, and strings reconstructed from gut and sinew. When modern musicians played it again, the sound was astonishingly rich, deep, resonant, and emotional. You could almost imagine a court musician plucking those strings while Queen Puabi, whose tomb was found nearby, reclined in a hall lit by flickering lamps. Around her, incense smoke drifted. Outside, the desert hummed, and in that space, music transformed the air into something sacred. To the Sumerians, each note had cosmic meaning. Music wasn't entertainment, it was a conversation with the gods. The lyre's sound was believed to align the human spirit with celestial order. So when we hear it today, thousands of years later, we aren't just hearing an ancient melody. We're hearing humanity's first attempt to bridge heaven and earth. Flutes older than history. Go back even further, to a time before writing, before civilization itself, and you'll find that humans were already making music. In a cave in southern Germany, archaeologists found flutes carved from vulture bones and mammoth ivory, over 40,000 years old. Imagine that for a moment. In the Ice Age, as glaciers covered Europe and giant beasts roamed the plains, a small band of humans gathered around a fire. One of them lifted a hollow bone to their lips and blew, and for the first time, the world heard melody. The sound would have been soft, breathy, and haunting, not unlike wind over stone or the call of distant birds. But in that moment, it was a declaration. We exist. Music may have been our first true art, older than painting, older even than language as we know it. It gave shape to emotion before words could. And when researchers played replicas of those flutes, the melodies that emerged were simple but powerful, primal yet peaceful, like the heartbeat of early humanity. The Egyptian harp and the sacred sound of the Nile. In ancient Egypt, music flowed through every corner of life, from royal courts to temple rituals, from harvest dances to funerals. One of the most mysterious of their instruments was the arched harp, a long, elegant frame with strings that curved gracefully toward the sky. The Egyptians painted these harps on tomb walls, often next to depictions of gods or feasts for the dead. They believed that music guided the soul on its journey to the afterlife. When modern historians reconstructed the sound of these harps, they discovered tones that shimmered and echoed softly, like ripples of water. The melodies seemed to breathe, each note rising gently before fading into silence. It's no coincidence that many Egyptian songs imitated the rhythm of the Nile, calm, eternal, flowing endlessly. To them, music wasn't just sound, it was balance, the same principle that held stars in their places and kept kingdoms from falling into chaos. Perhaps when we listen to that soft harp sound now, we can still sense a little of that balance, the tranquility of an empire that measured eternity not in years, but in melody. The lost songs of Greece. The Greeks were obsessed with music. To them, it was mathematics, poetry, and philosophy woven together. Yet for centuries, their actual melodies were lost, until archaeologists uncovered fragments carved into marble and written on papyrus. One of the most haunting of these rediscoveries is the Seikilos epitaph, found engraved on a tombstone from the 1st century CE. Beneath the musical notation, the inscription reads, "As long as you live, shine, let nothing grieve you beyond measure. For life is short, and time demands its due." When musicians played the notes, a delicate melody emerged, gentle, almost wistful. It's believed to be a love song, or perhaps a reminder of joy amidst mortality. Listening to it today, you can almost feel the emotion of the person who wrote it 2,000 years ago. It's proof that even though languages change, hearts do not. The Greek philosopher Plato once wrote that music is the movement of sound to reach the soul for the education of its virtue. And somehow, that ancient song still does exactly that, the science of reconstructing silence. Recreating ancient music is not a simple act of reading notes. Often, no notes survive at all. Archaeologists must piece together fragments, the shapes of instruments, the spacing of holes on a flute, the vibration patterns on ancient strings, and then use physics, ethnomusicology, and even computer modeling to guess how they might have sounded. Modern musicians who dedicate their lives to this work describe it as a kind of sonic archaeology. They aren't just recreating instruments, they're resurrecting emotions. Each sound that emerges from these reconstructions is like a ghost, faint, uncertain, but full of meaning. And the deeper we study, the clearer one truth becomes. No matter how different our world is, the language of sound has always been the same. The first humans sang for the same reason we still sing: to connect, to remember, to express what cannot be said. The quiet return of forgotten voices. Today, universities, museums, and musicians are collaborating to bring these ancient songs back to life. Performances using replicas of Mesopotamian lyres, Greek oloi, or Egyptian harps are being recorded and studied. The results are astonishing. The sounds are not just historically fascinating, they are emotionally moving. Listeners describe them as serene, mysterious, even familiar. It's as though these ancient vibrations awaken something in us, an ancestral memory of sound long forgotten. Because when we listen to ancient music, we are not just hearing the past, we are remembering it. The world, once filled with stone and silence, suddenly breathes again, and for a brief, shimmering moment, we hear what time tried to erase. Section 11. The Enigmatic Songs of Ancient China. Bells, chimes, and the music of the imperial court. When we think of ancient music, we often imagine stringed instruments or flutes carried through the air like whispers of the past. But in ancient China, music was not only about melody, it was about cosmic order, ritual, and the resonance of the universe itself. Here, sound was both spiritual and practical, tied to philosophy, astronomy, and governance. The music of the imperial courts was carefully constructed to reflect harmony, virtue, and the natural rhythms of life. Bells of heaven and earth. The most remarkable instruments in ancient Chinese music were bronze bells called bianzhong, which could be hundreds of years old even in the early dynasties. These bells were often commissioned by emperors, crafted with such precision that each one could produce two distinct notes depending on where it was struck. Entire sets of bianzhong could span more than 5 octaves, creating a scale of sound that was mathematically sophisticated, yet spiritually resonant. These bells were not merely for entertainment. According to Confucian principles, music had the power to shape moral character and regulate society. A properly tuned court orchestra could maintain balance, not only in the palace, but metaphorically in the empire itself. Music was a mirror of cosmic order, with each note representing the rhythm of the heavens and the alignment of human virtue. During ceremonies, bianzhong would be hung in massive wooden frames, often adorned with dragons, phoenixes, and celestial motifs. When struck, the sound was astonishingly pure, deep and rich, with a shimmering quality that seemed to linger long after the bell had stopped vibrating. Modern reconstructions reveal tones so complex that even contemporary instruments struggle to replicate their resonance. The chime towers and ceremonial harmony. In addition to bells, ancient Chinese courts also featured chime towers called zhonglou, which housed rows of hanging chimes made of bronze or jade. Each chime produced a single note, and when struck in sequence, they created music that was both melodic and ritualistic. The chimes were particularly important during ceremonies to mark seasonal changes, lunar cycles, or imperial proclamations. They were carefully arranged according to the principles of yin and yang, ensuring that each note reflected the balance between opposites, light and shadow, heaven and earth, human and divine. One of the most fascinating aspects of these chimes is that they often survived in tombs and ancient archaeological sites, silent for centuries. Yet their shapes and inscriptions tell us stories about the rituals, the ceremonial dances, and the reverence for sound itself. When reconstructed, the music they produce is eerie yet soothing, as if the echoes of long-dead emperors still linger in the air. Flutes, pipes, and the breath of nature. While bells and chimes dominated ceremonial music, more intimate sounds came from flutes and panpipes, known as dizi and sheng. Unlike the grandeur of the imperial orchestra, these instruments reflected personal expression, nature, and poetry. Flutes in ancient China were often made from bamboo, with carefully drilled holes that allowed for subtle control of pitch and tone. The sound is airy, delicate, and slightly nasal, capable of mimicking birdsong, flowing water, or the sighing of the wind through trees. The sheng, a mouth-blown pipe organ, created harmonies that were ahead of its time, polyphonic textures that modern musicians still marvel at for their ingenuity. Music was intimately tied to the seasons and natural phenomena. A melody played in winter might imitate the crisp cold of frost, while a spring song could evoke blossoms and flowing rivers. Philosophers and musicians alike believed that listening to these compositions could align the listener with nature's rhythms, promoting health, clarity, and serenity. The mysteries of ancient notation. Unlike the simple symbols used in some Western music, ancient Chinese notation could be complex, incorporating pitch, rhythm, and timbre in one elaborate system. Often written on bamboo slips or silk, these notations required both memorization and intuition to interpret. Modern scholars attempting to reconstruct this music face immense challenges. Instruments must be built according to precise measurements. Striking a bronze bell incorrectly or blowing a bamboo flute at the wrong angle can alter the intended resonance completely. Yet when performed correctly, these pieces sound astonishingly sophisticated, suggesting a deep understanding of physics, acoustics, and aesthetics that rivals contemporary music theory. The role of music in imperial life. In the imperial court, music was not merely entertainment. It was education, diplomacy, and ritual. Young princes and officials were trained in music from childhood, learning not just to play instruments, but to understand their symbolic and moral significance. Music could accompany poetry recitations, mark the beginning of the agricultural year, or be performed in offerings to ancestors. When foreign emissaries visited, music served as a demonstration of cultural sophistication and political authority. A perfectly timed chime, a resonant bell, or a delicate flute could convey more about the state's power and harmony than words alone. In this way, music was both art and political language, reflecting a civilization where sound carried meaning as deeply as written or spoken words. Reconstructing the lost sounds, today, researchers continue to unearth fragments of these instruments and attempt to recreate their original tones. Bronze bells are cast following ancient measurements. Bamboo flutes are carved using traditional techniques, and chime sequences are reconstructed according to historical diagrams. When performed together, the music is ethereal. It is at once ancient and timeless, a haunting reminder that sound connects us to generations long gone. The meticulous rhythms of the bianzhong, the airy whisper of the dizi, and the layered harmonies of the sheng transport the listener into the imperial court, as if one can hear the echoes of silk robes, ceremonial drums, and whispered prayers of the past. Music as memory. Listening to the reconstructed music of ancient China is an intimate experience. It reveals that music has always been more than entertainment. It is memory, philosophy, and a bridge across time. Each note, each resonance, carries the essence of lives lived centuries ago. The emperors, musicians, philosophers, and artisans whose sounds were lost to history, but preserved in delicate bronze, bamboo, and silk. In this sense, reconstructing ancient music is not simply an academic pursuit. It is a form of meditation, a gentle conversation with ancestors, and through it, we are reminded that while civilizations rise and fall, the human desire for beauty, harmony, and connection is eternal. Section 12. The Music of the Pharaohs, Ancient Egyptian Instruments and Ritual Sounds. In the golden sands of ancient Egypt, music was everywhere, not just in the grand temples or during lavish celebrations, but woven into the very fabric of daily life. Unlike the Western notion of music as entertainment, in ancient Egypt, it was ritual, communication with the divine, and a reflection of cosmic harmony. We Egyptians believed that sound had power. It could heal, honor the gods, or guide the soul through the afterlife. Music was a language that transcended words, bridging humans and the sacred. Percussion, the heartbeat of Egyptian ceremonies. Central to Egyptian music were percussion instruments, which provided rhythm, energy, and structure. Drums, tambourines, and clappers were ubiquitous, used in temple rituals, funerals, and public festivities. The Egyptians crafted their drums from hollowed-out wood or clay, stretched with animal skins, producing deep, resonant beats that could be heard across courtyards and riverbanks. The sistra, small metal rattles, were particularly fascinating. Often shaped like hoops with crossbars and tiny metal discs, they produced a shimmering sound meant to invoke the gods, especially Hathor, the goddess of music, joy, and fertility. Priests and priestesses shook the sistra during ceremonies to awaken divine presence, believing the metallic clatter could cleanse spaces of evil spirits. The rhythmic pulse of drums and the bright clatter of the sistra created a musical tapestry both energetic and spiritual, merging earthly and celestial vibrations. Wind instruments, voices of the Nile, flutes, pipes, and reed instruments were another cornerstone of Egyptian music. The aulos, a double reed pipe, and end-blown flutes filled temple halls with melodic patterns that echoed the flowing Nile. Interestingly, the Egyptians also used panpipes, made from multiple reeds of varying lengths, to imitate the sounds of nature, birdsong, rustling reeds, and even the river's gentle current. These wind instruments were not merely ornamental, they symbolized life, fertility, and the breath of the gods. Flute music often accompanied religious ceremonies, particularly those honoring Osiris, god of the afterlife. In these contexts, the flute's haunting notes were believed to guide spirits safely into the next world, while the living offered prayers and libations. Stringed instruments, lyres and harps. In addition to percussion and wind instruments, strings played a central role in Egyptian music. Harps and lyres, often richly decorated, produced ethereal vibrating sounds that added melody to ritual and leisure alike. These instruments ranged from small, portable lyres to enormous arched harps with dozens of strings. Royal courts favored harps, often played by women musicians trained from childhood. Music was both personal and ceremonial. A queen might play a harp during private reflection, while in temples, large ensembles of harps, lyres, and flutes accompanied hymns and chants. The strings were believed to vibrate with the ka, or life force, of the player, reinforcing the idea that music carried spiritual energy capable of influencing both the earthly and divine realms. Vocals and chanting. Instrumental music was often paired with vocals. Chanting and singing were integral, particularly during funerary rituals. Priests recited hymns to gods or intoned spells from the Book of the Dead, and the musical tones of their voices were believed to activate the magical potency of these texts. The Egyptians considered the human voice sacred. It was a conduit between the mortal world and the divine, able to bring blessings or ward off malevolent forces. Professional singers were trained rigorously, learning not only melodies, but also the symbolic inflections that would align with specific deities or ceremonial occasions. A single syllable might be repeated hundreds of times to maintain harmony between humans and gods, highlighting the patience, discipline, and spirituality embedded in ancient Egyptian music. Music in daily life. While temples and palaces offer the most vivid glimpses into Egyptian music, it was also present in daily life. Festivals, weddings, and market gatherings all featured music, sometimes led by itinerant musicians who traveled from town to town. In some cases, instruments doubled as status symbols, especially beautifully crafted harps and decorated drums that indicated wealth or social rank. Even children played small flutes and percussion instruments, learning rhythm and melody from an early age. The act of making music was considered educational and moral, fostering coordination, discipline, and an appreciation for beauty. It was also a way for Egyptians to connect with nature, imitate birds and rivers, and honor their gods while celebrating the rhythms of life. Tomb instruments. Preserving the sound of eternity. Many musical instruments have been discovered in tombs, indicating their importance in the afterlife. Egyptians believed that music could accompany the deceased, ensuring comfort, guidance, and protection on their journey to the underworld. Bronze rattles, small harps, and flutes were often buried alongside mummies, sometimes accompanied by detailed instructions for their use. The silent instruments of tombs tell us much about the rituals, priorities, and beliefs of the Egyptians. When modern archaeologists reconstruct these instruments, the sounds are hauntingly beautiful, connecting us with lives that existed thousands of years ago. The soft pluck of a harp or the shimmer of a sistrum evokes a civilization deeply attuned to the spiritual and emotional resonance of sound. The legacy of ancient Egyptian music. Reconstructing ancient Egyptian music is not simply an academic pursuit. It is a meditation on history, culture, and the human need for harmony and expression. The precise rhythms of percussion, the haunting melodies of flutes, and the rich harmonies of harps remind us that music was a vital, multifaceted part of life, spiritual, social, and aesthetic. By listening carefully to these reconstructed sounds, we gain insight into the daily life of pharaohs and commoners alike, their joys, fears, and spiritual aspirations. Music was a reflection of civilization itself, structured, meaningful, and transcendent, resonating through temples, homes, and tombs, preserving the heartbeat of an ancient world. Section 13. Music as a bridge between life and afterlife. As we come to the final reflections on ancient music, it becomes clear that for civilizations such as the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Greeks, and Romans, music was far more than mere entertainment. It was a vessel of spirituality, a companion in both life and death, and a reflection of humanity's enduring desire to find harmony in the universe. Across temples, courts, and common homes, music resonated not only through instruments and voices, but through belief, intention, and ritual. Music in funerary practices. One of the most fascinating aspects of ancient music is its role in death rituals. Egyptians, for example, included instruments like harps, flutes, and bronze rattles in tombs, often alongside the mummified bodies of pharaohs, priests, and wealthy citizens. These instruments were believed to accompany the deceased on their journey into the afterlife, providing comfort, guiding spirits, and ensuring safe passage through a world unknown. The careful placement of these instruments highlights the profound connection ancient people felt between sound and spiritual well-being. Similarly, in other ancient cultures, music played a protective and sacred role. In Mesopotamia, lyres and drums were sometimes buried near graves to prevent malevolent spirits from disturbing the dead. For the Greeks and Romans, funeral music could serve to honor the departed, mark the solemnity of the ritual, and help the living process grief. Across civilizations, there is a recurring theme. Music was not ephemeral, but eternal, echoing beyond life itself. The emotional power of music. Ancient music also had a deeply emotional purpose. Whether in daily life, religious ceremonies, or royal courts, it was used to influence moods, create community, and express the inexpressible. The Egyptians believed that the vibrations of stringed instruments could awaken the life force, or Ka, in both humans and objects. Flute music might soothe anxieties, while rhythmic drums could incite enthusiasm, courage, or devotion. This emotional and psychological awareness underscores how sophisticated ancient societies were in their understanding of sound. Music was a tool, a healer, and a connector, not just an art form. It brought people together in moments of joy, provided solace and sorrow, and maintained a rhythm to life that reflected the natural and cosmic order. The transmission of musical knowledge. An often overlooked aspect of ancient music is how it was taught and preserved. Musical traditions were passed down through oral instruction, apprenticeship, and ritual practice. Egyptian priests and musicians underwent rigorous training to master chants, rhythms, and instrument techniques. Similarly, Greek and Roman educators believed in the moral and intellectual benefits of music, teaching children scales, melodies, and performance etiquette to cultivate both skill and character. The careful attention to teaching and ritualized practice allowed music to survive across generations, even when written notation was rare or non-existent. Music became a living tradition, constantly evolving, yet always grounded in the spiritual and social frameworks of the time. Modern reconstructions and rediscoveries. Thanks to archaeology and historical research, today we can reconstruct the sounds of ancient music. Instruments excavated from tombs and temples are studied and replicated, while ancient texts, iconography, and wall carvings provide guidance on performance techniques. Modern researchers can recreate the haunting tones of a harp in a pharaoh's tomb, the rhythmic pulse of a sistrum in a temple, or the melodic flow of a Greek lyre in a public gathering. Hearing these sounds reminds us that music is a universal human experience, transcending time and geography. It is both familiar and alien, bridging the past and present in a way that allows us to feel the emotions, beliefs, and daily rhythms of civilizations long gone. Listening to these reconstructions, one can almost imagine the bustling courts, the solemn temple rituals, and the quiet reflection of individuals who lived thousands of years ago. The enduring legacy of ancient music. Ancient music leaves behind more than instruments and notations. It leaves behind a philosophy. It teaches us that sound has purpose, emotion, and spiritual significance. Music was a means of connecting humans to each other, to nature, and to the divine. It reminds us that art is not merely decoration, but a reflection of how societies perceive and interact with the world. From the reverberating drums of Egypt to the melodic strings of Greece, from sacred chants in temples to the intimate lullabies sung in homes, the ancient world used music to create structure, meaning, and beauty in life. It was a mirror of humanity's eternal quest for harmony and balance, demonstrating that even thousands of years ago, people understood the profound effect of sound on mind, body, and soul. A final reflection. In exploring ancient music, we realize it was never just about notes or instruments. It was about life itself, the rituals, the celebrations, the sorrows, and the hopes for immortality. It connected humans across time, bridged the earthly and the divine, and transformed daily existence into something sacred and resonant. As we listen to reconstructions today, let us not only marvel at the ingenuity of these ancient civilizations, but also recognize the timeless nature of music. It is a language that transcends eras, a thread connecting us to the past, and a gentle reminder that humans have always sought comfort, expression, and transcendence through sound. Indeed, the music of the ancients still whispers to us today, inviting us to pause, listen, and feel the rhythms that shaped the heartbeat of history.